Hello, welcome to the Address of Fear. If you love horror stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. If you're ready, let's get started. The darkness of the night hung over Lemp Mansion like a heavy veil. The moonlight reflected off the old stone walls, casting a faint beam of light through narrow windows. However, that light seemed to carry with it a call from deep within the house, slowly fading as it moved. This house, embracing the night, was suffocating with fears accumulated over centuries, lost times, and tragedies. Once upon a time, the walls of Lemp Mansion were adorned with gold and emerald green. It was filled with luxury and grandeur. But now, those glittering days had given way to a gloomy silence. Now, every corner of the mansion echoed with sorrow and fear. Inside, with every step, the walls seemed to compress under the weight of stifled sobs. It was as if the spirits of those who once lived here could not escape their suffering and had become trapped within the house. Every night, those spirits returned, merging with the darkness to relive the horrific memories of the past. As you walked through the house, your feet sank into the old wooden floors, each step accompanied by a deep creak. This sound was a type of awakener, frozen in time. In that moment, no one could truly understand the value of the seconds spent in this house. For every second was a part of the fear built up over the years. With every step, that fear grew stronger, more real. Passing from one room to another, you would follow the faint traces of light lost within the walls. However, no one could ever find the source of that light. It carried the lost memories of those who once lived here, returning like a reflection. On some mornings, the light vanished, like a shadow, merging with the encroaching darkness and awakening the spirits. And those spirits, not only did they make their presence known, but they also felt every moment of their past tragedies repeating. In the deepest hours of the night, a strange coldness would blanket the house. This coldness touched the skin like a hand, and the darkness began to wrap itself around everything. Once a symbol of wealth and power, this mansion now carried the marks of destruction in every corner. The tragic fate of each member of the Lemp family had been immortalized within its walls. Every room bore the echoes of a suicide. Everywhere the traces of a lost life, a shattered hope, and broken dreams were evident. At times, a sound would rise from the walls, enveloping you in fear, a scream, a whisper, and for a moment one would have to confront the darkness of the past. Without a doubt, the most terrifying aspect of the house was how everything remained trapped within its memory. The old wooden doors with their rusted hinges would creak open, and a fresh scent of blood would rise from the walls. No one could ever pinpoint the source of that smell. Only those who entered would experience a fleeting moment of fear and a sense of lost trust. No matter how much time one spent within the house, those brief moments of fear always seemed one step ahead. One night, a wind would sneak into the house, shaking old portraits that hung on the walls. The smiling faces of the past would mockingly push forward, as if to taunt you. The people in those portraits gazed at you, their expressions showing the loss of everything they once had: power, wealth, love. They had once understood that everything they possessed was fleeting, and the trapped spirits in the house had to share the same fate. During those nights, time itself seemed to play a game. Slowly, eerily, everything within the house would change. It was as if time stood still, and only the horror of the past was briefly reminded to everyone. No one could ever tell how long they remained in that moment. A night, a day, maybe an hour. But at the end, there was a place within the old house's walls where time didn't exist. And in the end, a single thought would form in everyone's mind. No one truly lives here. Only a life trapped between the past, the night, and, the spirits existed. Lemp Mansion had not only trapped its walls, but also every dark moment and fear within them. The tragedies once lived here began to repeat again and again, in the days that never were. Inside this house, only lost souls and an endless darkness remained. That darkness deepened with every passing minute, allowing the light to slowly vanish. And as the house embraced the night once more, it continued to carry the memory of everything that had been lost. Once, the Lemp family was the most renowned and respected family in New Orleans. Thomas Lemp, the city's most famous beer producer, had reached the peak of his fortune. In those days, his name was synonymous with gold and prestige. In the mansion of his family, symbols of wealth were everywhere. A luxurious life, grand soirees, sparkling faces and laughter. But over time, no one noticed that something began to seep beneath that glitter. The darkness slowly started to envelop the splendor. Thomas, having built a massive beer empire in his youth, began to rule the city. However, every success comes at a cost. Behind their wealth, it was as if an invisible shadow was looming. Something was starting to weigh down on the happiness of the Lemp family. Whenever the family members rose higher, another tragedy would appear. But none of them saw this rise as a sign of a curse. They simply believed everything would continue to shine brighter and grow larger. Yet within all this luxury, a dark destruction was quietly growing. The Lemp family's fortune began to disappear, accompanied by whispering voices that filled the walls of the house. One by one, the tragedies that cruelly touched each family member seemed to be guided by an unseen hand. It was certain that a dark power existed somewhere above, but whether that power was a curse or an internal collapse, no one could solve it. As Thomas Lemp found success in his work, his family began to fall apart one by one. The first suicide was the death of Thomas's eldest son. A rapidly fading life, a momentary collapse, dragged toward a dark end, blending with the morning light. When Thomas's son died, the silence within the old mansion grew even thicker. Something inside began to break one last time, but no one questioned this first loss. Everything was thought to continue as before. But this suicide was just the beginning. Real fear took on a new dimension for the family members left behind. Even after his son's death, Thomas continued his business. But the spirit within the house clung to him like a bee. At night, faint sobs began to seep from within the walls. In every room, there was another vanishing ghost. Thomas, the man who once controlled everything in the house, one day found himself spiraling toward another disaster after a terrifying incident at a drinking table. That night, in a drunken state, Thomas Lemp, watching the end of his own soul, killed himself by the river. This was the deepest, most horrific step in the Lemp family's downfall. However, Thomas's suicide was only the beginning. Following it, Thomas's other sons and daughters were pulled one by one toward the same dark end. One by one, they disappeared within the house. Their fates also appeared as dark suicides. After each death, the walls grew denser, and the house became filled with the breath of death. The house was no longer associated with life, but with death. But what was the real cause? A curse, or simply the family's internal collapse? Even at their brightest times, all of the Lemp family members carried a void within them. While wealth and power had once made them strong, they had actually made them more fragile. Mental collapses, psychological trauma, fear, and loneliness grew silently within each of them. Each was connected yet distant from one another, lost in the arms of their cursed past. The last remaining members of the Lemp family felt trapped in the dark rooms of the house. Every night, steps that approached the silence of the house at midnight signaled that the steel walls that had once protected the house would break. As family members disappeared one by one, the darkness within Lemp Mansion deepened. No one truly understood their ends. Those once smiling faces had turned into masks. The darkness within each of them echoed within the house's walls. Eventually, the end came. After Thomas Lemp's death, the house was completely abandoned. But within those abandoned walls, the old shadows, the lost spirits, still remained. Lemp Mansion was a monument to the past, the lost fortune, and the fall of a family. Though it seemed as if everything had ended, something else remained within the house. Perhaps the darkest thing. The remaining family members' secrets, the truths never told, were still trapped within the walls and the forgotten corners, continuing to dwell with the fears that once belonged to them. Was it truly a curse? Or was it simply the decay within the family itself? These unanswered questions became the very essence of Lemp Mansion's dark history. Lemp Mansion had been abandoned for years, but within the walls that once echoed with the sounds of the most luxurious salons, only the terrifying melody of silence remained. However, that silence was occasionally disturbed. Suddenly, at midnight, a scream would echo from the depths of the house. But whether these screams were real or just incomprehensible to the human ear, no one knew. A silent, murmuring scream, an echo of someone's final cry for salvation, while others faded away like shadows. At first, these sounds were only the creaking of the old walls of the house, a faint ghostly song combined with the coldness seeping through the windows with the wind. But over time, these sounds grew more distinct, more terrifying. Visitors, the moment they stepped inside, began to feel an unsettling sense of unease. Each one had the feeling that something was behind the different walls. In a mansion that once housed the world's wealthiest family, there were now only forgotten spirits. And those spirits spoke with silent screams within the abandoned walls. One night, these screams became so loud that they could be heard from every corner of the house. But no one could pinpoint the source of these screams. Sometimes they rose from a wall, other times from a corner of a room, only to quickly fade into silence as if they had vanished within time. Visitors, throughout every minute spent inside, had to strain to listen to these sounds. But no matter how hard they listened, they could never find the source. Those screams were a sign of a truth. This house, between its walls, carried the pains of the past, the lost lives, and the terrifying echoes of suicides. In the darkness of the night, a shadow would quickly vanish between the rooms. It would pass from one room to another, seemingly hiding behind something, but that thing was never visible. That shadow was a presence that awakened the deepest fear in the visitors. Even with its mere movement, it pushed everything around it, backward for a moment, leaving behind a trail of fear. Whenever someone saw that shadow, their hairs would stand on end, and they would feel as though they were being watched. But that shadow was always so quick. No trace was left of where or when it had disappeared. Its existence was like a nightmare that roamed the house. No one could escape it. Over time, some researchers who gathered the courage to visit Lemp Mansion and uncover something about its dark past decided to venture deeper. A group of young people with chilling courage began to explore every corner of the mansion. Late at night, the screams echoing through the walls drove them deeper into the house. As the air grew colder, the unease they felt only intensified. The moment they entered, it felt as though they had stepped into another world. The atmosphere in the house carried a heavy darkness that hinted at something being broken inside. That darkness had seeped into the corners of the rooms, slowly intoxicating them. The visitors began to disappear one by one within the house. At first, it was thought that only one person had gone missing, but after searching, no trace was found. They searched every corner of the house, but the missing person had vanished in an instant. It was as if that person had been slowly absorbed into the walls of Lemp Mansion. The next missing person was an unseen figure. This figure was merely a silhouette that would briefly appear in the corners of a room. Around it, there was a chilling sensation like a cold wind blowing. No one knew who that figure was, where it came from, or where it went. The screams grew louder. The sounds echoing between the walls seemed to move like a living entity. As the night delved deeper, finding the source of these sounds became more impossible. So much so that the sounds didn't just scream in one time frame but sometimes transformed into a person's deepest fear. That fear left marks on the body, quickening the visitors' heartbeats and cutting off their breath. For a moment, everyone lost sight of one another. Each person felt the moment the other disappeared, but no one dared to return. That fear separated them one by one. In the end, the brave group that had decided to go deeper never returned. That night, once again, the dreadful silence reigned over the house. It was certain that the missing would never return, but Lemp Mansion continued to accept every new arrival in the same way. Those shadows, those screams, those missing figures. Each one was a sign of a life that had once been lost. No one thought the curse would ever end. Lemp Mansion was alone once again, and the walls continued to carry the screams of those lost spirits. The lives that once echoed inside the house had now disappeared into the darkness. Who truly were the ones who had vanished? Within this house, embraced by the night, only shadows, screams, and lost figures remained. Within the abandoned walls of Lemp Mansion, a group of researchers gathered at midnight, determined to solve the lost secrets. They were a few brave individuals who had dared to descend into the depths of this dark house, once the center of wealth and power. Each of them was in search of the Lemp family's curse, the lost spirits within the house, and the fears left behind. But there was something none of them knew. Lemp Mansion was waiting for them as prey. The house was no longer just a house. It had become a realm where souls were trapped, time and space bent, and sanity was lost. There was something within the house, something that would approach them in a way they never expected and destroy each of them with their own unique fears. As the group stepped through the old abandoned entrance, the first thing that overwhelmed them was a coldness. In that moment they realized they had made a mistake, but there was no turning back. Each of them had chosen to enter together, trusting one another. Yet, with every step they took, they felt as though something was following them. The walls of the house carried the rot of years, and from each room a different chilling sensation spread. Truly, the moment they entered, it felt as though they had crossed into another world. In every corner of the house, a dark intensity grew. As they moved from room to room, suddenly, an old door opened by itself. The door creaked as it opened, and with it came a terrifying coldness in the air. Inside, it seemed as though time had completely been forgotten. Everything felt frozen: earth, walls, air. But there was something more distinct. As they approached the walls of the room, they couldn't believe their eyes. Words, written in a lost language, appeared on the walls. These writings were in a strange, incomprehensible language, shaped by bizarre symbols. It seemed as though a history, a story, a curse had been inscribed upon them. The words appeared one after another, shimmering as they rippled across the wall. Among the words there was something. It was powerful enough to pull them in. One researcher, inspecting the writing on the wall, spoke with a trembling voice. This isn't a language," he said. "This is some kind of ritual writing, like a sign of an ancient curse." But in that moment, something else changed within the house. The writing seemed to come to life. Behind every word, they began to hear the breath of the souls. That writing was a final call from those who had once lived here, from those who had disappeared here. The magic of the writing pulled each of them in, causing them to disappear with every step they took. At that moment, the darkness of the house deepened like a single breath. There was a tremor, a shiver in the air, shadows in every corner of the house suddenly began to move. In the center of the writing, a figure appeared. As fear overtook them, the researchers began to see the silhouette. This figure seemed to resemble a long-lost family member. But this wasn't a ghost. This figure, twisted by the bending of time, was a living part of the past. Suddenly, the figure's eyes turned toward them, and only one word was whispered. "Don't run!" That word began to pull them in like a magnetic force. The words on the wall quickly disappeared, replaced by another terrifying symbol: a deep, dark eye. The eye watched each researcher individually, growing closer, so close that they could feel it even as they breathed. A mental pressure, a chilling disappearance moved toward them. This eye was the carrier of the past's pains, curses, suicides, and the lost souls. This eye was vast enough to take them all in. One of the researchers, panicked, began to run. But no matter how fast he ran, his feet didn't touch the ground. In his mind, only the echoes of that eye remained. The others, looking at each other, stood frozen for a while. But in that moment, something else became apparent on the walls. Sounds began to hum as they emanated from the walls. With every step, shadows began to take shape. The researchers felt as if time was running out, as if something was getting closer. Perhaps it was a sign of a spirit trapped within Lemp Mansion, lost forever. For a moment, the eye silhouette disappeared, but the missing would never return. Because the curse was deepening, drawing in not just a group of researchers, but everyone. Only one person realized that the others had disappeared. At that moment, Only a whisper echoed in their ears, "Don't run." But as they fled, the doors of Lemp Mansion closed once again. Those left behind vanished behind the shadows. That writing, that curse, would trap them once more, and nothing could save them. And deep within the house, Lemp Mansion, with its curse, waited for each new guest. Years later, when the curse that lingered in the dark walls of Lemp Mansion had not faded, but only the waiting souls remained, one more man gathered the courage to enter. He did not remember the lost researchers of the past, or perhaps he did not want to remember, but the moment he decided to enter Lemp Mansion, he felt detached from the world, as though he was starting to sense time and space in a different way. The house whispered to him. Something approached him from every corner, and with every step, time seemed to break its own rules. At first, his first step seemed normal, but as he progressed, a strange feeling deepened within him. It was as if time itself was shifting before his eyes. The boundaries between the past and future seemed to blur, with each step conjuring up a different association. Echoes of the past, ghosts of the dead, and the eyes of lost souls stared back at him. A void opened in his mind, a void that contained the pains of the past and the lives that had been lost. These screams reverberating in his mind were the shadows of a world that had vanished. The walls of the house were laden with the memories of the dead. As he moved, those memories appeared one by one before his eyes. On every wall there was a soul, in every room, a lost life. No matter how hard he tried to close his eyes and steady his breath, he couldn't find relief, because even the briefest moment of closing his eyes would pull him deeper into the house. The sobs of the past, the cries of the lost souls, drew nearer with every step. As he moved from room to room, everything seemed to reshape itself into a different version. Every object, every detail had meaning, a meaning that was detached from the flow of time. One room seemed to carry the memories of someone who had once lived there. In another, the shadow of a lost life echoed. But all of them felt distant and yet simultaneously close. In that moment, as he tried to understand both the past and the future, it felt as though time itself was absent from the house. Past and future intertwined, their boundaries indistinguishable. He could see the future, but only for a moment. In that moment, everything was clear, yet it disappeared and faded the next instant. He glimpsed the future, but it was filled with the dark memories of the past. And within those memories there was a void. That void was the absence of all the lives that had once existed within Lemp Mansion. Lost lives, and the only thing that remained was loneliness. That loneliness had been shaped by past suicides. Once joyful, these walls now filled with emptiness and the echoes of pain. The only memory of a life lived here was the trace of solitude. He could see the future, but in that future, something was missing. That missing piece was the lost souls. With every step, the void deepened, and the flow of time fractured. The house pulled him deeper inside. Suddenly, silhouettes began to emerge from the dark corners of the house. Their eyes, the eyes that watched the souls, focused on him. Each of them carried the shadows of their pasts, the ghosts of their suicides. In that moment, loneliness itself rose from the depths of the house and began to approach him. But loneliness was not just a person, it was a force. This force offered him the missing pieces of time, the lost lives of the past, and the darkened future. The future, yet with a void. In that void, there were memories of every life and every soul that had been lost. The forgotten lives of those who had once lived here. Their shadows alone continued to exist within that void. Everything inside the house began to change. At that moment, there was something inside the walls. Something was getting closer, touching him. In his mind, there was a void, a space around the void. It felt like trying to experience the future, but losing oneself within it. Each step was like searching for the missing pieces of time. But this emptiness was a disappearance, a void, a missing piece of a life. As the house presented each new room, each new image, he felt as if he were part of a future darkened by the loss of everything. The void gnawed at him, drawing him deeper into its depths. Inside that future, something was missing. One thing. That missing piece was the memories of lost lives, and those memories were the echoes of the suicides of those who had vanished. In that void, where time had shattered and only the forgotten remnants of a life remained, he was left alone. The darkness grew thicker. With every step, he passed through the suicides of the past, the lost souls, and their pain. And with each step, he began to feel the future darken. There was once time, but that time had been lost. Lost. Like everything else. Years had passed, but the deep darkness of Lemp Mansion had not faded. Despite time's slow decay, the spirits trapped within the house continued to linger, their echoes of past tragedies still filling every corner. The only thing left behind were the shadows of lost lives and legends, slowly fading yet still present within the walls. The fear of the night, the silent screams that recalled the suicides of the past, rose again, repeating every night. In the end, the former owner of Lemp Mansion grew weary of the curse that haunted the house and the dilapidated state it had fallen into. He decided to leave. But this was not the end of the house. Even abandoned, the mansion would not let go of the spirits and darkness within it. He left the place without knowing its secret history, the stories of the lost souls, or the true reasons behind the suicides. But once again, the house was left alone. Its abandoned walls continued to swallow every life and every pain lost in the void. One morning, as the first light of the sun touched the earth, a man found himself inside that dark house. He felt unnervingly close to its walls, the cold stone, and the lost past it harbored. He had entered late at night and wandered through every corner, surrounded by the voices of those who had once vanished. Only a trace, a whisper, followed him. It felt as though he had stepped into another world. The echoes of the old times rang in his mind, the pains of the past signaling to him. But nothing was as it seemed. Inside the house, everything was frozen. Only the flow of time had disappeared. The interior of the house was wrapped in darkness, shadows creeping into every corner, and the air grew heavier. But the fear it held was merely an illusion. The loneliness within its walls had become alive. With each step, the walls seemed to draw nearer, and a fleeting silence grew deeper. The man moved forward, searching for traces of the lost souls in every corner, but there was always something missing. That missing piece was the memory of a lost life. Even the briefest breath he took began to pull him backward. And then, as the first light of dawn broke, the man with a fleeting moment of courage moved toward the deepest room in the house. But then, something changed. Everything inside the house seemed to come alive. A faint tremor ran through the walls, and a soft hum echoed beneath the ground. In his mind, the murmurs of the past, the shivers of the lost ghosts, merged into chaos. The man wanted to turn back, but it was too late. Fear approached swiftly. It was as though the echoes of the past were pulling him in. He wanted to flee, but he couldn't move. In that moment, he could feel the presence of every lost soul within the walls. With each step, he was vanishing more, and as he continued, the darkness deepened further. His eyes, illuminated by the morning light, noticed something. Time within the house had been interrupted. That morning, Lemp Mansion had once again begun to feed on its curse. The man vanished, lost within its depths. He might not have been the first, but he would likely be the last, because the house was a living space that held every lost soul, and the man became just another piece of a vanished life. When the morning light touched the outside of Lemp Mansion, a void remained inside. The man had disappeared. But the house's darkness, the echoes of the lost lives, had opened a path to another world. Now, the walls were cloaked in a pale and lifeless silence. The house had not only remembered the lost souls and the legends of the past, it continued to feed on them, deepening its curse with every passing moment. No one would ever learn what that house had truly witnessed. Those secrets were buried within the walls. Only the walls, devouring every lost fragment of life, continued to give birth to new fears with each night. And Lemp Mansion once again was left alone. What remained were the mysterious traces on the walls. These traces held the memories of every lost life. This curse was a fate trapped forever within the House.